Hey, tabletop role players. I thought I'd give you a quick overview of what I consider some of the best tools to play role playing games online. Now, I've been playing games online for about 8 years, and I've tried just about every software tool out there, and I found different tools work better for me for different games depending on what I'm trying to do, theater of the mind or tactical D&D and that sort of thing. So I thought I'd give you a quick overview of some of the things I've learned over the years. And of course, all of this is just my personal preference. And so take my advice for what it's worth. First off, let's talk about your equipment you have. With the coronavirus, a lot of people are at home and learning to game online for the first time. And so the first thing you have to start with is what's the equipment that you have? Do you have a nice microphone or webcam, or what equipment do you have on hand? A lot of modern computers have a built-in camera, which is pretty good, and usually those are sufficient to the task if you want to use video, which is optional. The built-in microphones on a laptop are generally they're not that great, so I would recommend getting at least some earbuds, the kind that work with a phone, that have the little built-in microphone on the wire. Those work pretty well. Even better yet are the nice headsets that you can buy for online gaming. I will say that if you wear a headset for a long time, that can actually get uncomfortable sitting on top of your head. So what I've actually done, because I've done a lot of online gaming, is I've got a Blue Yeti microphone right here, and I've tuned it so that it will the gain is 60%. And notice that if I have it facing the computer, you actually might have a tinny sound because of the reflection of sound. So there's some settings where you have the gain at about 60%, and you've got it on cardioid, so it's only recording in this direction. If you're using a Blue Yeti, which is one of the best microphones for gamers, what that lets you do is do hands-free recording, no headset. So it's pretty convenient. It's cost about $130 on Amazon. So anyway, that's kind of the top end, but on the low end, just a little cheap set of earbuds with a microphone will also work. Generally, you have to be careful in games about feedback. And so with the cheaper microphones, if someone doesn't have a headset and they're using their microphone on their laptop, a lot of times you can get feedback. So in general, if you're a GM and you're inviting, let's say it's a one-shot con game, and you're inviting new players, it's a good recommendation. Have folks have some sort of headset or headphones so that they don't get that feedback loop. With a nice Blue Yeti like this, it's less of an issue. And so another consideration is your technology comfort level. So I'm going to walk you through some different options, but which option works best for you is really a function of what you're comfortable with, and also the style of the game you're running. I will use different software tools for a game like Fate, which is very theater of the mind oriented, than say D&D, which I tend to run in a very tactical way with battle mats. Of course, you can run it with theater of the mind, but the rules kind of lean towards being tactical and counting 5-foot squares and all that. So just think about that. I will say, as a game master, you generally have a lot going already, and then when you switch to gaming online, to try to manage the software tools, especially if you're doing something like Roll20, that can add a extra level of complexity. One thing I do if I'm gaming online, I do this offline too, is actually I try to outsource things whenever possible. So like initiative, that's something you might try outsourcing to another player to track initiative for you, that sort of thing. So look for ways to get help. Maybe the technology support, you could get someone else to do that. Another thing to consider is when you're choosing a set of tools for an online game is this game a one-shot or is it a campaign? I will usually have a different set of tools for a campaign because I have regular recurring players, and so I can assume that they're going to take the time to learn a tool like Roll20 with its macros and its built-in character sheets and a very cool suite of tools. That may be overkill for a one-shot at an online con. So just think about that when you pick out your tools. So let's get into some of the tools that are out there. Now I've got 4 different categories of tools, and in each of these categories, there's dozens of tools out there. Here are the 4 that in each category that I recommend. Once again, personal opinion, and your taste may vary. For audio, if you're doing an audio-only game, if you don't have a good video camera or that's just your preference, Discord is probably, I would say, the top tool. You can play an entire online game just with Discord, using its chat and using its voice controls. There are also dice bots. I'll have some links on the video in the notes on some of the different dice bots you can get. So those are really cool. And so Discord is probably the top choice in the audio only category where you're not using video. Google Hangouts is another option. Even though Google Hangouts is thought to be a video platform, you can do Google Hangouts with the video turned off. So that's another easy option. Zoom is the same way. You can do a Zoom video call, but without the video, just the audio only. That works pretty well for those familiar with Zoom. And of course, Skype is an option. In the video category, I would put Google Hangouts at the top of my list, mainly because it's so easy to use. So if you're inviting players in, there's just 3 buttons and a few little settings, but it's just really easy to use. One little quirk, I think, of Google Hangouts is to schedule a hangout. Of course, if you can do an ad hoc hangout and it will give you a link and you can share that link out. But if you want to schedule a game, like for an online con, for Google Hangouts, the only way I know off the top of my head is to go to Google Calendar and schedule a Google Hangout, and then it will give you a link in advance. So even before you've opened up the Hangout, it'll give you that distinct URL that you can share to your players. So that works pretty well. Be advised that Google Hangouts has announced that they're going to be changing their name at the middle of 2020. I've heard different brand names. I think the current one they're landing on is Google Meet. So it may change names. They may add some, right now it's free, Google Hangouts is free, but Google Meet, there may be a small monthly charge as they move to more of a business model. So be aware of that, but even with the small charge, I would still recommend it as the top video platform. Discord has some built-in video that you can use that, certainly if you're comfortable with Discord. Zoom and Skype also have video options. I would say Zoom is a bit overkill, and so unless you're using it all day long for work and you're just used to it and that's what you want to use, I think Zoom has because it's such a powerful business tool, it has a lot of controls, and with a lot of controls comes potentially confusion from end users. So it wouldn't be my top choice for a one shot, but of course use whatever you're comfortable with. But Google Hangouts is my top choice for video. In a second, I'll talk about Roll20. One of the things I'll mention, Roll20 has its own built-in video, but it's video and audio. Sometimes it's a little quirky, and I tried it again a couple of weeks ago just to make sure that's still the case, and it is. Essentially, their infrastructure for streaming video is not the best. So what I do, and what a lot of people do, is I'll have Roll20, if we're using that virtual tabletop, up on one window, and Google Hangouts in another window, and have them side by side on my screen. That works really, really well. So a great combination for a video and a virtual tabletop. File sharing, lots of options. I prefer Google Documents, and Dropbox is certainly an option. Email, if it's a con game, you can just email out the links to character sheets and rule summaries and whatnot. And depending on what tabletop or audio or other tools you're using, sometimes you may have a built-in chat, and you can maybe put a link in chat to some like Imager or some document or image sharing platform. So that's another option. The last thing for online tools are virtual tabletops. Now, you don't have to have a virtual tabletop to run a game online, but it can help. But there's you can go low tech or high tech. The high end, I would say, the high end that is also very accessible is Roll20. It has well over 1 million active users, so it's the big giant juggernaut in the online role playing world. Lots of D&D modules and things are there. Dozens and dozens of character sheets are built in, which is really handy because the online character sheets, you can assign a character sheet to a player, and once they fill out the character sheet, then you just click a button and it'll roll their ability score, their attack roll, their damage roll straight from their character sheet onto the shared chat window. So that is a really cool feature. Roll20 also has a D&D Beyond Chrome plugin. So if you're using D&D Beyond for your character sheet, you can get this plugin that I'll have a link to in the video notes, and it works really well. So you're on D&D Beyond, you click your character sheet, the relevant area, it'll go over and Roll20 and roll the dice roll for you. Very, very slick integration. One thing I will mention about Roll20, the same is true of Fantasy Grounds, which I'll speak to in a moment, is that just be aware that there is the potential, if you want to spend hours and hours and hours either creating, finding maps and setting them up with things like dynamic lighting. You can turn it into what feels like an online video game if you want. It's cool, unless you have a lot of free time. Just beware of that time sink. I tend to have a few generic maps and integrate some theater of the mind, and not have to spend so much time picking out maps. For a con game, I might spend some more time, but just be aware that you can do a time sink there. An upside, though, is Roll20 is really fast with combat because they have macros, dice rolling. People don't have to spend several seconds selecting their dice, rolling the dice, adding up the dice, macros, and character sheet options. Just clicking a button automatically does all the math for you. So the combat can go really fast. So that's a good thing. So be aware of that. So Fantasy Grounds is another good option for online tabletops. It does require, unlike Roll20, which is a browser-based solution, Fantasy Grounds requires a software install. One caveat there is Fantasy Grounds historically has had very spotty Mac support, and right now the latest version of Mac will break Fantasy Grounds. So if you're doing a con game, I would not recommend Fantasy Grounds because it doesn't work on a Mac and you don't know what players are going to have. Also, it requires a software install. It's an extra layer of steps. If you're playing a campaign and all your players have Windows or a version of Mac that doesn't break Fantasy Grounds, then it's great. Fantasy Grounds is a great solution, probably the most beautiful one of all the options out there. Another option for virtual tabletops is just what I call do-it-yourself. And you just simply take a piece of paper or a whiteboard and you just hold it up to the camera and let people see what you've just scribbled quickly. So that's, if you're just getting going or for a con game, that's a great option. You can also use other tools like Google Draw is a really nice, simple tool that doesn't require all the Roll20 integration and learning curve that might be there if you used a tool like Roll20. Now, Roll20, another thing I'll mention about it before I forget is that it has a really cool ability. You can pop out the chat window. And so even if you weren't using the map, if you wanted to pop out that chat window, just have a shared dice roller, that can be kind of cool. It's probably the best dice roller that I know of for that sort of play. Another tip with Roll20 is if you're not in a particular combat situation, show a picture of something that's not a 5-foot grid battle match. Show them just a scenic background picture or logo or something like that. If there's a map, people tend to think I need to take my token for my character and move it. And so like if you're in a bar scene or something in a tavern, just don't and it's not going to be a combat, don't show a combat map because they go into combat mode. So that's just another tip. My last option for virtual tabletops is having a second camera. And so that I've got another set of videos that I will link to. You can actually use just a common cell phone for a second camera. And like in Google Hangouts, you can just set up an extra user that joins the Hangout that's actually an account on your phone. And you can just have the phone actually recording a whiteboard. And you can very closely simulate a traditional tabletop environment. So if you're doing a lot of theater of the mind type gaming, that is a good option. Just in general, pick a role-playing system that matches your play style. One of the things I would say is if you're moving to online play and you don't want to mess with lots of technology, you might want to think about a system that lends itself to theater of the mind. So you might switch systems even in order to support the new medium in which you're gaming. So Fate is an example system that works really, really well as theater of the mind. Another tip is when players are not speaking. So when you're joining the game, there's a lot of chatter. That's fine. But once you get into combat or heavy role playing, I advise that you have your players mute themselves when not speaking, especially if they're going to be shifting around with their microphone. That will cause a lot of background noise, and it can be very annoying. So have themselves put themselves on mute. Also, from a lighting perspective, it's easier to see you if you have lights in front of you. If you have lights behind you, it can make you very dark. In general, I prefer video over audio only. It's a little easier. It feels more social when you see the people. Also, I found it's a little easier to, you can read people's expressions because you can see their faces. And also, it helps a little bit with people not talking over each other because just the way the video works, and you can see when they're about to speak, that sort of thing. So in general, the top tool combinations that I would recommend if you're new to playing online, start simple. Google Hangouts plus just a do-it-yourself, sketch map, holding it up to the camera. That works really great. Super easy. You can do that within 5 minutes with almost no learning curve. For a con game, or if you're doing a theater of the mind campaign, or you're new to the technology of doing games online, that's where I would start. If you're doing a campaign and you're doing lots of games and regular players, or if you're doing a tactical game like D&D that tends, or at least 5th edition D&D, which tends to be more tactically oriented, I would recommend Google Hangouts plus Roll20. You don't have to go nuts with all the maps, but at least having even a map or two, and you can draw your maps dynamically using your mouse in Roll20. That can really help to have that shared map capability, even if you use it at a very simple level, and then you can evolve into more advanced features like macros and things like that later on. And then if you want to do audio only, maybe you don't have a good video camera, or you're more comfortable not having your face shown online or whatnot, or low bandwidth. Audio only solution could be Discord, and I would still recommend Roll20, even if you're simply using its interactive chat feature. You can do things like whisper to characters, which is equivalent of passing a private note. So some really cool features, even if you're just using chat and Roll20, even if you're not using a battle mat. Roll20 has a lot of nifty features, so I would give that a shot. Anyway, those are my top recommendations. Take them for what they're worth. I'll have some links to the resources I mentioned in the video notes. Hope you've enjoyed this video and you found it helpful. Talk to you later. Thanks.